Okay, so you want to own a casino. The math is on your side before a single customer walks through the door. Every game on your floor is engineered so that over enough hands, enough spins, enough rolls, the house wins. Not eventually, mathematically. Guaranteed. So here's the question that should actually keep you up at night if you understand this business. If the game is already rigged in your favor by law and by design, why does it cost billions of dollars just to keep being allowed to collect on that guarantee? Let's start with the part everyone already half understands, because you need the real number before the rest of this makes sense. The house always wins isn't a saying. It's a percentage built into the rules of every single game on the floor called the house edge. American roulette, with its double zero, hands the house a 5.26% edge on every spin. Blackjack, played with flawless basic strategy, gets that edge down to somewhere around 0.5%. The best deal on the floor, and casinos offer it anyway, because even 0.5% repeated across millions of hands a year is a mathematical certainty dressed up as a coin flip. This is the law of large numbers doing exactly what it's supposed to do. Any single hand is genuinely unpredictable, but run enough hands and the outcome stops being chance and starts being arithmetic. A casino isn't gambling. It's the only party at the table not gambling. Everyone else is. So if the house's win is already locked in by the rules of the games themselves, you'd assume the business model from there is simple. Deal the cards, spin the wheel, collect the edge, repeat forever. Instead, a casino spends an enormous share of its revenue on three things that have nothing to do with dealing cards or spinning wheels at all. The right to operate, the ability to stop people from cheating, that guaranteed math, and the far stranger problem of people who aren't even trying to win, who are using your tables for something the house edge was never built to catch. Let's take those one at a time because the order they go in matters. Start with the most basic cost of all, the right to exist. Before a casino deals a single hand, it has to be licensed, and in the world's biggest gambling market, that license is not a formality. It's one of the largest single expenditures a casino company will ever make. In December of 2022, the government of Macau, the special administrative region that generates more gaming revenue than the Las Vegas Strip and Atlantic City combined in a good year, renewed 10-year gaming concessions for 6 casino operators: Sands, Galaxy, Wynn, MGM, Melco, and SJM. In exchange for those licenses, the 6 companies jointly committed to investing roughly $14.8 billion into their properties over the following decade, with more than 90% of that money, over $13 billion, required to go toward non-gaming development: hotels, convention space, entertainment venues, anything that isn't a card table. Melco Resorts' individual concession, just one of the 6, required an investment commitment of roughly $1.47 billion, on top of an annual premium of about $3.74 million simply for holding the license, paid whether the casino floor has a record year or a disastrous one. That's your first fixed cost, and notice what kind of cost it is. It isn't proportional to how many hands get dealt or how many roulette wheels spin. It's the entry fee for being allowed to run the mathematically guaranteed business at all, a fee measured in the billions, paid upfront and annually, completely detached from the house edge it exists to protect. You can have the best mathematics in the world working in your favor at every single table on the floor, and none of it matters if a government decides you don't get to open the doors. Now, assume you've cleared that hurdle. You're licensed. The tables are live. This is where the second fixed cost kicks in, and it exists for a very specific reason. The house edge only works if the game is actually being played the way it's designed. The moment someone can nudge the odds back in their own favor, by cheating, by colluding with a dealer, by counting cards precisely enough to flip a 0.5% house edge into a player edge, your guaranteed mathematical win stops being guaranteed. So casinos spend heavily on watching, and they've spent heavily on watching since long before modern surveillance existed. The practice goes back to the earliest days of Nevada gaming, when owners built crawl spaces into the casino ceiling with one-way glass, so a man could lie on his stomach above the pit and watch the cash move across the tables below with his own eyes. That crawl space became a catwalk, and the catwalk earned the nickname the industry still uses today: The eye in the sky. Modern versions of that same idea run on dedicated pan-tilt zoom cameras that, at the high end, can cost $10,000 or more apiece, feeding into a surveillance room staffed around the clock. And there's a hard human limit built into the system because industry veterans widely agree that a single surveillance operator cannot reliably monitor more than around 100 cameras at once, no matter how many split screens you give them. Added up across an entire casino floor, and the historical industry standard for what to budget on security and surveillance alone sits at somewhere between 2 and 3% of total casino revenue. A permanent recurring line item that exists purely to defend a mathematical edge the casino already legally owns against the much smaller number of people trying to steal it back, one hand at a time. Licensing and surveillance taken together are the two costs you'd expect if someone described this business to you cold. Pay for the right to operate, then pay to protect what you're owed once you're operating. But there's a third cost, and it's the one that has actually ended casino operating licenses outright, cost companies hundreds of millions of dollars in fines, and forced total boardroom turnovers. And the strange thing about it is that it has almost nothing to do with the house edge at all. It's the problem of people walking onto your floor who were never trying to win in the first place. Here's the mechanism, described the way regulators themselves describe it. Someone walks up to the cage with a large amount of cash, buys chips, plays a handful of hands, sometimes barely any hands at all, and then walks away and cashes the remaining chips back in for a check or a wire, sometimes hours later, sometimes the next day, sometimes through a completely different person entirely. On paper, that looks like an ordinary, if unlucky, gambler. In practice, that person was never gambling against the house edge to begin with. They were using the casino cage as a currency exchange, converting cash of uncertain or criminal origin into a check that now carries the clean, respectable explanation of casino winnings. The house edge is completely irrelevant to this transaction because the launderer isn't trying to beat the odds. They're paying in the form of whatever they lose on those few minimal hands a service fee, sometimes small, sometimes nothing at all, to have their money's history rewritten. The clearest, largest, most thoroughly investigated example of exactly this problem is Crown Resorts, one of Australia's biggest casino operators, and the running example worth following all the way through, because it shows what happens when this third cost gets ignored rather than paid. For years, Crown operated junket rooms, VIP gambling areas run in partnership with third-party operators who brought in high-rolling clients, primarily from mainland China, and handled the movement of their money on the casino's behalf. One of Crown's largest junket partners was an operator called Sun City, and when Australia's financial intelligence agency, ASTRAC, and a series of state inquiries eventually pulled the thread on that relationship, what they found was staggering in scale. Crown's dealings with high-risk junket operators, 43 of them flagged by the company's own venues as suspicious, represented a combined turnover of roughly 69 billion Australian dollars, about 46 billion US dollars. Investigators documented cash deliveries to junket cash desks operating inside Crown's own properties, in amounts between roughly 700,000 and 1.5 million Australian dollars at a time, physically carried in, as the Financial Crimes Watchdog's own lawyer told the court, paper bags, shoeboxes, and briefcases. A judge overseeing the case put the obvious question to Crown directly. If there wasn't a deliberate intention to break the law, what exactly was the explanation for that? Separately, and just as damaging, Crown was found to have sold more than 160 million Australian dollars in gambling chips to customers who paid using credit or debit cards between 2012 and 2016. Its own legal advice concluded this contravened casino laws because it let money move onto the casino floor through a channel far harder to trace and far easier to reverse than cash ever was. The federal court's eventual findings after formal inquiries in 3 separate states described Crown's conduct in terms you don't often see attached to a licensed public company. The violations were, in the court's own words, systemic, long-standing, and egregious, permeating every service the company offered its customers. ASTRAC noted that Crown had maintained a business relationship with a major junket operator while aware of allegations connecting that operator to organized crime, and investigators separately flagged roughly 23 million Australian dollars in cash discovered in a private gaming room, with no adequate explanation for its presence. Crown was ultimately fined roughly 450 million Australian dollars, about 300 million US dollars, across 546 separate breaches of anti-money laundering law. It was formally declared unfit to hold a casino license in Victoria, in Western Australia, and most dramatically in New South Wales, where an entire newly built $2.2 billion casino tower in Sydney sat completed and unable to legally open a single gaming table for years while the company tried to prove it deserved to operate at all. Sit with what actually happened there because it's the whole lesson of this video condensed into one company's collapse. Crown owned the mathematically guaranteed edge on every single legitimate hand played at its tables. That edge never stopped being true. Roulette still paid the house 5.26% on every American wheel it operated. Blackjack still ground down basic strategy players by 0.5%, hand after hand, exactly as designed. None of that math failed. What failed was everything sitting on top of the math. The license that allowed the math to be collected legally, and the compliance systems that were supposed to stop the casino from becoming, in effect, an unpaid financial service for organized crime. And when that failed badly enough, the punishment wasn't a fine calculated against the house edge. It was the temporary or total loss of the right to operate at all, which meant the loss of 100% of the edge forever on every table in 3 states over a problem that had nothing to do with anyone actually beating the house at cards. This is the part that makes casino economics genuinely strange compared to almost any other business you could study. In most industries, your biggest costs scale with your biggest risks. More inventory means more theft risk, more customers mean more fraud risk, more revenue generally means more exposure, proportionally. A casino's most catastrophic risk doesn't come from anyone beating its games. The games are, by design, close to unbeatable over any serious length of play. The catastrophic risk comes from people who never intended to play them for real in the first place, walking cash in one door and walking a clean check at another, while the casino's own compliance systems either miss it or, as regulators found with Crown, actively look away from it for years because the volume of money involved was simply too lucrative to interrupt. So put the whole picture together, because this is the actual shape of the business, not the version implied by the house always wins. Revenue, a mathematically guaranteed edge on every legitimate wager, built directly into the rules of the games. Reliable enough that over millions of hands it stops resembling luck at all. Cost number 1. Licensing, a fixed, often billion-dollar entry fee and ongoing premium, paid regardless of table volume, simply for the legal right to collect that edge. Cost number 2, surveillance and security, roughly 2 to 3% of revenue as an industry baseline, existing purely to keep the guaranteed math from being quietly stolen back one cheated hand at a time. And cost number 3, the one that doesn't show up as a neat percentage anywhere, because it's really a tail risk rather than a routine expense. The compliance apparatus required to stop the casino floor from being used as a laundering service for money that was never wagered against the house edge to begin with. A cost that, when it's underpaid, doesn't just eat into profit. It can end the entire license the whole business depends on. The house does always win. That part was never in question. What actually determines whether a casino survives long enough to keep collecting on that win isn't the mathematics of the games at all. It's whether the company sitting on top of that guaranteed edge is willing to pay honestly and continuously for the license to operate, the eyes to protect the tables, and the discipline to ask an obvious question every time a shoebox full of cash shows up at the cage. Because the one thing this business has proven over and over is that the house can be mathematically unbeatable and still lose everything.